this happen. Nick and I are very excited to bring you this new program that we created. Everything about EVs that you wanted to know but were afraid to ask. And Nick and I are just really excited to bring some new information to the table. Just yesterday, I got some great information that we're excited to share with you today. But number one, we wanted to address your questions and concerns about EVs. We've heard so much, misinformation, disinformation, and also great things about EVs, how fast they are, how amazing they are to drive. The low center of gravity makes it just, easy and incredible to drive these vehicles. And there's so many great things about them. But we wanted to hear really what your concerns were and what you would like to get out of this class, because we have lined up a ton of material and there's so much more that we couldn't include in the class. So we would love if you wouldn't mind just to chime in and say where you're calling in from and what you would like to get out of this class, what you would like to know. If there's something very specific that you would like us to address, we would be happy to do it during our time together. We have an overview of the EV market, both in the United States and California and globally, about what's happening that puts things in perspective. We go through the EV concepts that you need to understand, and quite frankly, that I get wrong on a regular basis. Nick corrects me too often. Sometimes I will say kilowatt when I actually mean kilowatt hour, and it just slides out of me. And we have to be thoughtful about what those two things are, because they're very different concepts in practice. And we'll work through all of the mechanics of those things and make it easier for you to understand really what you're looking into and what you're buying when you're buying an EV in those terms. We'll talk about electricity and charging and your bill and other things that have to do with how to save more money. And choosing and living with your EV, the issues around maintenance and really how to properly care for this vehicle that is radically different than your internal combustion engine. We'll also talk about cost of ownership and sort of the myths and bugaboos around those things, and what really solid organizations who have researched this are finding. We have those research studies for you. And there's a ton of resistance to EVs. We know that. You can look on social media and other places where there's just so much information and disinformation. So we're going to dive into the frequently asked questions and the myths around EVs, and really try to get to the core of this thing and the mythbusters. And nothing like anything. They're not perfect, and we want to make that fully evident to you as well as we go through the course. Nick's going to go through a whole section. Nick is one of the best modelers in the state, and he has done so much work around the code. And so specifically, he's going to go through what the code requires for EV charging as you're building in the state of California specifically. And then we're going to talk about the latest iteration of what these cars can do in terms of bi-directional charging. There's very, very exciting opportunities with this. It's very much the bleeding edge at this point. It's not the leading edge, it's the bleeding edge. And we want to make sure that you're aware of the opportunity and also, the pitfalls of very early technology at that stage. We also have case studies for you and a little summary to sum it up. But really, the most important thing we think is the first bullet point, that we address your questions and concerns about EVs.
Hey, so, Robert?
Yeah, Nick.
Yeah, that's why when I promoted this class on LinkedIn, I said, come and learn the true, the false, and the mostly false. Because
exactly.
Yeah, there's so much information out there. And now with our multi-years of driving these things, we've got some good perspective on it. A couple of good questions that were put in the chat while you were speaking. Roxanne asked about updates in battery technology and if we can expect longer range cars. Michael put in he'd like to learn more about kilowatt hours and cost to charge. They own 2 Teslas and could benefit from digging into that.
That's great.
And Roxanne also interested in bidirectional charging.
Nice.
Okay.
Great, Roxanne.
Also want to point out that Danica has set this up so you guys are able to speak. We do not want this to be a one-way road. We want it to be a two-way street. We're going to use all kinds of EV puns today. And so please feel free to unmute and blurt out your question when we're on that topic.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nick. And that's the advantage of having two presenters too. One of us is going to be monitoring the chat at all times. And so, we can sort of have two conversations happening at the same time as we're going through the material.
Yeah.
And Nick, you want to
Now,
talk about the disclaimer?
yeah, a quick note, always important for us to note, we could blur out the names of all the products we're talking about, but that's just annoying and counterproductive. So just a note that we're not advocating for any particular manufacturer of EVs, manufacturer of EV chargers. We're using them as real world examples and not advocating for any particular one. Also, you got to realize so much depends on when you use electricity to charge these things and where you buy your EV and which one you buy. So estimates of costs and utility costs, you have to put a wide range of plus and minus on, not rely on solely for your decision making.
Yeah, and we'll talk through all that stuff. We just wanted to let you know we're not advocating any particular manufacturer or any particular product in this process, but you will see names of products and companies, obviously, as we go through it. Nick and I have collectively owned 9 EVs and we were just talking about that since 2011. So we have a lot of experience with it, and we're tinkerers at heart. So we've played with a number of different things, and we don't want you to necessarily do everything that we've done. And for liability purposes, we're going to show you some things that we don't advocate that you do, but we will show them to you anyway.
What's possible? Yeah.
Right, what's possible. And just in terms of introductions, my name is Robert Fortunato. I'm the owner and builder of what's called the Green Idea House. I'm also the president of Force Strategy Consulting. We do leadership strategy and innovation work with large professional services firms. But I got bit by a bug in about 2010 to build one of the first net zero energy zero carbon case study houses that was less expensive than standard construction. And that's exactly what we did. We came out of the ground in 2012. It's about 2,100 square feet. We had about 5,000 people through the place before, during, and after construction. And it's a very simple build that we shared. Our goal was really to share this concept, this technology with everyone. So we made an open source project. It's been Greenpoint rated, Living Building Challenge, Net Zero Energy Pedal rated as well. And as you can see from our Southern California electric bill, and if you're not familiar, every one of those bars is a month. Every bar above the line, we're using more energy than we harvest. Every bar below the line, we harvest more energy than we use. And you can see that we overgenerate by about 1.7 kilowatt hours, 1.7 thousand kilowatt hours every single year since it started. And Nick and I do classes around this whole separate topic. And we'd love to have you in those classes as we go forward. We also did a TED Talk. If you want to hear the backstory of the house in 18 minutes, you can hear that very quickly. Nick, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I was inspired to get into this line of work by Robert's project in part. I was the stucco manufacturer supplier for his project way back when. We ended up selling that stucco company, and then I dove full into energy consulting and remodeled my own house in a mainstream deep energy retrofit in 2015. We called that the Net Zero Nest. Just to be like Robert, we put up our own website with information for people to follow and learn from our experience. And it's a delight to live in. Got my first EV. It was a Nissan Leaf, 2016 as well. Installed an EV charger in the garage. And so I've been living with EVs and a net zero house, ever since then. So share that experience with you. I'm also a certified energy analyst, board member of CALGreen, which does all the energy modeling and Title 24 compliance throughout the state. Then in 2022, we added this ADU above the garage, and it's a delight for those tenants to live in. And from time to time, Robert, they'll ask me to borrow my charger for their Tesla, which I just
No
love.
kidding.
It
No
costs me a
kidding.
little money, but I love that they use it every now and then.
Love it. That's
Yeah.
great. That's
And,
terrific.
and so besides Title 24 compliance work, I teach a bunch of classes for Edison and 3C Ren and PG&E, especially on electrification. And so this topic today of EVs is sort of tangential to having an all-electric house, but also deeply interrelated in that the cost of ownership of an all-electric house with EVs, there's just a beautiful synergy there where much of the time you're able to charge your EV using solar power in part, and offset those costs of ownership using solar panels overall, and just really convenient to have your own gas station, fueling station in the garage and handle all that at home. And then Robert, that's the inside of the ADU. Similarly, we've had a really good economic impact of these decisions. We had no electric bill in the early days of net metering when the terms were really favorable to the consumer. Now we have about a $1,400 electric bill, and most of that is for charging our two EVs, which is on the next slide. There's my original Leaf charging in Van Nuys, the first public charger I ever used. You can see it looked like a frog. So EVs have come a long way since then. Now I'm driving a Chevy Bolt, and you can see it pictured in front of our house on the right. And my wife has a Kia Niro, which I need to add into this, also an EV. And Robert, I think I put some captions on the specs of those. Oh, okay, they dropped off. 30 kilowatt hour battery on the Nissan Leaf. So the range on that was about 110 miles. 60 kilowatt hour battery on the Chevy Bolt. So that gets 238 miles per charge. So just in 3 years, amazing how far it advanced.
Yeah. Roxanne loves the Chevy Bolts as well. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have one now as well. We have a Chevy Bolt and a Tesla, and can't say enough good things about the Chevy Bolt. Really good. And it's an honor and a pleasure to work with Nick. Nick is one of the best modelers in the state, and really understands the code and the application of it in ways that are super, super helpful to the work that we do. So it's a real honor to be working with him on this project. And then I just wanted to start with a little background, and because we wanted to make sure anybody could jump onto this class. And really the evolution of EVs has been fascinating, because there were, obviously, in the 1910s, there were electric vehicles, and they had electric vehicle charging stations, and all kinds of stuff happened. And then the internal combustion engine sort of won out, all the way to the point where we got to hybrids, which became sort of the mainstream of what this thing could do, in that Toyota came out with their Prius, and it added a battery and regen brakes basically to an internal combustion engine car, and it meant that the car could go better, longer, faster, just without any other mechanism than the regeneration from the car's braking system. But at the time, it was really revolutionary, and they did very well in that it saved the people who bought them and drove them $300 to $800 a year. And people said, well, why can't we just get a bigger battery and plug it in? And that's when plug-in hybrid EVs came through. And it's basically a hybrid with a plug, and the savings depends on how much you plug in and how big the battery is on these cars. And they basically went from 20 to 40 miles on EV only, and then it would switch over to gas. And you could use gas on long trips. And so for people who only had one car, but also wanted to plug in, it was a nice choice to have. And there might have been incentives. A number of people I know that I talked to did get incentives for buying these, and I think there still are some incentives. But you have two powertrains, and that's what we want people to understand. With those vehicles, you have an electric powertrain and you have an internal combustion powertrain. So you still have to change the oil and the spark plugs and all the rest of the stuff. So there are downsides And we saw them as sort of transition vehicles until the next generation of vehicles came through, and that's where we are right now. We have battery-only batteries or battery-only cars. They're full EVs. And there's a lot of savings to them because with one powertrain, we know that there's 50%, 50% less maintenance to be done on the car. And I don't know about you, but every time I brought my internal combustion engine into the garage, the guy wanted to do thousands and thousands of dollars worth of upkeep and maintenance and all kinds of stuff. And these things have thousands less parts than an internal combustion engine. And I have to make a little confession in that I was a juvenile delinquent in high school. And so they sent me to what was called VOTEC, vocational technical school, half the day. And I learned how to rebuild diesel engines and cars in that process. So I actually have an advantage in the petrol fueled technology in that I could literally take a car apart and rebuild it. And at a certain point, I just realized that technology is antiquated in relation to what these EVs bring to the market. And in terms of reliability and speed and performance, Nick and I were talking about that earlier. It's just how much better these cars drive than internal combustion engines, which have a lot of weight up top, where all the weight in the batteries is down low. And so the handling in these cars are incredible. And there's still incredible incentives available, which we'll dive into and talk about your eligibility for those. But the one powertrain is the thing that minimizes the maintenance factor. A lot of people have been talking about hydrogen, and aren't hydrogen vehicles electric vehicles? Yeah, they have electric motors in them. But hydrogen is one of those technologies, from my perspective, that is always 15 years away. It seems, and what they currently make, how they make hydrogen, it's made from methane gas. And we know that methane is 80 times more potent than CO2 in terms of the harmful effects it has on the environment. And then there's the price and availability of hydrogen, let alone the aspects of it being, do you want to carry a tank of hydrogen around in your car when you could have an accident? There's all kinds of things of that nature. And the nice thing about EVs, there's a lot of talk about EVs catching fire. EVs will catch fire, and we'll talk about that later, but they won't explode. Your internal combustion engine and hydrogen have the capability of exploding. And there was a station that exploded in Torrance not too long ago. It was on the news, and it wasn't good. Let's just put it that way. And then we get to the price. Nominally, hydrogen is about $18 per kilo. The hydrogen car carries about 4 kilos max that you can pump into that tank. And then each kilo gets the driver about 66 miles. Times the 4 kilos, about 264 miles. Not a ton of range in relation to EVs that are coming out, long-range EVs that are coming out now. But that 264 miles will cost you $72 at the $18 price point. I went to the hydrogen station in my neighborhood that you see on the left, and it's actually $29 per kilo now. I'm not sure what the difference is. I'm not sure if it's a variation in the price of gas or what it is. But I just stuck with the 18. I didn't want to scare anybody, but that's, I want to also give you real world prices. By comparison, the average electric vehicle has an 80 kilowatt hour battery and gets about 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour. And we'll talk about those things specifically, which gives you a 280-mile range at 30 cents per kilowatt. We're kind of nominally saying that 30 cents is about an average cost for a kilowatt hour of power, but that's $24 versus $72. It's a big difference in terms of just basic price. So we kind of threw that one out the window a little while ago. We don't think that's a viable technology going forward, and we don't see it having major advances, despite the fact that the petroleum industry would love to see it come forward as a blocker to the EV movement. I wanted to show you this first commercial because I think it says it all about what we're not talking about enough. And this is the first EV, one of the first EV commercials. And can you guys all hear that? Nick, can you hear that?
Yep.
What if everything ran on gas? Then again, what if everything didn't? The 100% electric, zero gas Nissan Leaf. Innovation for the planet, innovation for all.
That's great. Roxanne, they should rerun that commercial, right? People aren't paying attention to the fact that it's still happening. There's a lineup of cars that run. I live on a busy street next to a school, and there's a lineup of cars every day that are just spewing out pollution. And the grit on my balconies is sickening, and the fact that we're breathing that on a regular basis. But this commercial really makes it visceral. And the reason why we are doing this program, and we really think we need to transition into these vehicles, not only they're more fun to drive, but they're better for our health, right? We know that PM2 that gets emitted by those vehicles causes heart disease, lung disease, and cancer. And it's 39% of the total stack of pollution that comes, our way. And you can see that on the left. And the cars are the biggest share of transportation CO2 emissions. It's light duty vehicles. Our cars and there's no reason why we can't make the shift. And we'll talk about that specifically. Heavy freight vehicles are also coming. International shipping is also 10% of that emissions. And 30% of that 10% is shipping fuel from place to place. So we could actually eliminate a large portion of the international shipping if we just got, those tankers. We can make energy locally. We don't need to have tankers going around the planet doing shipping oil. Okay, and so these are a couple of graphs from California, and a lot of people say the grid can't take all of that, additional load. And we added in the state of California hundreds of thousands of EVs over the last several years. And you can see on the left-hand side that the amount of energy used in California has not spiked. It's not going up
Excuse me, Robert, this
significantly.
looks like US data, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. The next one's, yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Yep. But in the same way, this is the story, right? We've added millions of EVs to the electrical grid, and the fact is that the energy consumption has not increased significantly as a result of it. We also know that coal is decreasing over time. That means everything that you plug in is getting more and more clean. And wind and solar are the least expensive energies that are out there. We know that for a fact. So we expect that trend to continue, but you can also see the gas line spiking up because as coal has decreased, they've replaced that with methane gas power plants. And we know that there are better ways to do that, but that's sort of a separate subject. And we know that EVs you have more of an energy intensive load to produce, but very quickly the energy paradigm shifts in terms of pollution. And you can see that in the graphs here, where the break-even point is at about 14 to 21,000 miles. The pollution that is created by the vehicle switches. And so EVs are much, much cleaner over time to drive. And you can see that as it's extrapolated in this example.
That's even considering the emissions of creating the electricity, right?
That's exactly right. That's all the way at the left is the emissions of creating the vehicle, which where the EV uses more energy and to create the batteries. Essentially, but over a very short amount of time. And these vehicles are known to go 200,000 miles on the same battery pack. And And so when, you know, a lot of people say, well, what happens when you have to replace the battery? They're finding you really don't, in most cases, have to replace the battery in the life of the vehicle. They just last a lot longer than people even imagined was possible. And new battery technologies and chemistries are coming forward, which are enabling the batteries to do more with less, essentially. I just wanted to pop this up. This is global energy use, and I just want to give a perspective on this because we're leaders in the world. We should be leaders in the world about technologies coming forward that other developing countries then adopt, right? That's just, you know, what happens in general. And you can see that coal is flat, but there's still significant amount of coal as to 2023 happening. Oil, you know, it doesn't look like it's significantly decreasing. Natural gas is kind of increasing. And then you go into hydropower, wind, solar. They're just tiny little elements of the global stack of the energy that we use. And we really just need to be transitioning to cleaner fuels, if for no other reason than these other fuels cause heart disease, lung disease, and cancer. In the United States alone, over 200,000 people die prematurely from the effects of fossil fuel burning. So if for no other reason to, you know, for your own health and the protection of other people, vulnerable populations, that's a very good reason to be doing these things. On the left-hand side, you can see what a very small percentage in the United States the EV market is, right? It's 30% of California, 30% of all EVs are sold in California, right? It's a third of the market essentially here in California. So California is doing a decent job, and we can do better. And they just took the mandate off. You know, the ban by 2035, they were supposed to ban all internal combustion electric vehicles, or I'm sorry, internal combustion engine vehicles. But they just took the ban off, and you know, I'm an economist, and by training, Nick and I both are economists by training, and we don't think that bans actually, you know, under most circumstances work. When you look at how fast these vehicles are moving forward, and if anybody has seen the videos of the latest Chinese EVs and their capabilities and their cost, you would be convinced that no one would want to buy an internal combustion engine by 2035. We're going to see how that plays out, but you know, we're convinced that the technology will win the day. And in the middle, you can see how the United States is doing and Japan is doing in relation to what China is doing. 50% of the cars sold in China have a plug. And they realized a little while ago that they actually couldn't compete in internal combustion engines. The world had dominated this with all the traditional players, and they said, well, we can do something different and outcompete the world by creating electric vehicles and really understanding and dominating that technology. And that's exactly what they're doing. And if you think, you extrapolate that one level out and you say, if I could run an army on all electric vehicles, tanks, and other vehicles, and then have outposts that could be renewable outposts, that is, they run off of solar and so forth, because the most vulnerable military piece of hardware is the fuel supply lines. And if you didn't have those tankers, you know, both trucks and ships that could easily be blown up, imagine how much more agile your military could be. They understood this, and I'm not sure that we actually still understand that. So it's a competitive advantage at a level that other people aren't even talking about, but they are dominating that space. And you can see BYD sells twice as many cars as even Tesla, who's the next runner-up. So we have a little catching up to do in that realm. The good news is there are so many different choices coming forward all the time because they are less expensive, they're safer, and they're more agile. I'm working on a couple of projects where we're looking to put all electric construction vehicles on the site because it's less pollution for the, you know, for the guys on the job, the men and women on the job, and they're actually safer. The diesel engines, you can't see and hear people who might be in your way as you're backing up these, very large, very dangerous machines. So we're partnering with Volvo and others on these projects to do something really generative, because we build these LEED Platinum buildings. And what's the first thing that we do? We put, diesel trucks on the site as the first thing that we start doing, and it just doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of different kinds of vehicles coming forward. I just saw something called, Nick, have you seen this thing called a Slate?
Yeah.
This pickup truck? Yeah, for $30,000. And they're doing, in all different niches, but a $30,000 truck that has a ton of capabilities, and you can customize it, just like parts and pieces, different size batteries, different configurations. It can be an SUV, it can be a pickup truck. So these are the capabilities of having the kind of platform that they have with a battery pack on the bottom, and then you can basically do anything with it coming forward. So it's a really exciting time
Yeah. Come
to
a
be
long
here.
way since my Nissan Leaf.
Exactly. Exactly. And how many kilowatt, was it 40 kilowatt hour battery in the
30.
Nissan Leaf? 30. No kidding. It's amazing. It's really amazing how far we've come, right?
Yeah.
So we wanted to put together, again, we wanted to make this a very wide open invitation for people so that you can refer back to our presentation. And I'll admit that it's too text intensive. We hope to sort of squeeze that down over this is the first time we're doing it, so we hope to squeeze it down over the next few iterations. But we really wanted to put the power in your hands to understand the technology and move it forward for yourselves. And so we created a glossary of terms that we hope are helpful for you to refer back to. When I started this game, somebody said an ICE vehicle. I didn't know what that was. It's an internal combustion, just very simple stuff. MPGE, miles per gallon equivalent. It's like the window sticker on your car that, how many miles the car can go on a gallon of gas. It's the equivalent of that. And we'll talk about that more as we go forward. Miles per kilowatt hour is a metric of how efficient the car is. And we'll be using that metric as we go forward. So gas-only MPG means the gas mileage a plug-in hybrid gets when the battery is spent. So there's a number of these things. I'm not going to go through them all right here, but know that all of these things are here for you. And that's the intention of this class is for beginners all the way to very sophisticated. We're going to talk about very sophisticated concepts by the end of this class. And we just want to make sure everybody was with us as we gone forward. One of the most sophisticated concepts is this thing about electricity, that people don't really understand electricity. And again, as a juvenile delinquent, I went to trade tech school, and I learned, and this is how they taught me how electricity works. And I wanted to share that with everybody to make sure that we're all just talking about the same things, because there's a lot of tech speak, and you can kind of get lost in the tech speak very quickly. But there's essentially, my teachers back in tech school said electricity is just like plumbing. And you can think about it that way, in that plumbing requires pressure and flow to give you a powerful output of your hose or something to turn a water turbine. You need both of those things to create what is power in water terms. And the same elements apply to electricity, where pressure is the volts. And you can see on the left-hand side that if your tank is more full, right, you'll get more pressure in that vessel that comes out to deliver that more quickly. And then amps is basically the rating, the flow, the amount of flow that is possible given the size of the pipe. And in electricity, it's obviously the size of the wire that you're dealing with, and you get more flow with a bigger pipe, less flow with a smaller pipe. And then another concept that we're not really going to talk about, but resistance is ohms in electrical speak, but it's the amount of restriction, and restriction can be from, again, a smaller pipe, or it could be from the distance of a pipe or the turbulence in a pipe. And so those same concepts apply to electricity as we get into it. But we just want everybody to understand volts and amps and watts will be talked about continuously in this process. And we just want you to have a grounding in those things. So The number watts is really the power element that we're going to be dealing with. And there's two ways to express it. One is sort of the peak power that's capable of being exerted in a moment's time, and that's a kilowatt. And a kilowatt is 1,000 of those watts. It's the measure of the electrical power. For EVs, it's used to express the power output of an onboard charger, for example, or the electric motor's power at its peak, discharge. And we express that in internal combustion engines as horsepower, but it's the same concept. A kilowatt hour is different. It's a storage amount. It's like, how much water do you have in the tower, right? Is the concept of a kilowatt hour in relation to water. And a kilowatt hour is how much storage is in a battery, for example. And so it's a unit of energy that is stored inside the battery that can be released over time, thinking of it like a gallon of gasoline. So a 10 kilowatt hour battery can release 1 kilowatt for 10 hours. So hopefully that helps explain it. And again, I misuse it too often. And if I do, Nick is going to catch me because he always does.
So far, so good. But
All right.
let me use my Leaf as an example.
Yeah,
It's
please.
got a 60 kilowatt hour battery, and the fastest it can receive charge is 50 kilowatts. So
That's
that
right.
means if I roll into a public charger, I can't say on fumes anymore because there's no fumes, but on fumes, it'll take just under an hour to fully recharge.
Beautiful.
A little over an hour, sorry.
That's
50
exactly where,
kilowatts, 60
yep,
kilowatt hours, 1.2 hours. Yeah.
that's exactly right. Exactly right. And so examples like that are really helpful to sort of grind in. At home, our our EV charges at 7.5 kilowatts. And so if you have a Bolt, that's the maximum capacity it has to take in that energy. It's 7.5 kilowatts. At a DC fast charger, like Nick said, we can charge the Bolt at 50 kilowatts and our Tesla at 250 kilowatts. And the average EV gets about 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour, right? And it's because it's not talking about peak load there, it's talking about a capacity for getting those 3.5 miles out. And then the average car drives 1,000 miles a month, and that's just a national average. At 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour, that equals 286 kilowatt hours. And if you multiply that by, say, you charge at home, and the blended rate would be about 25 cents a kilowatt hour, that equals $71. And gas at the equivalent of $3.50 a gallon would be about 30 with a car that uses 35 miles per gallon range. They would that same 280, or I'm sorry, let's see, the same mileage would cost about $100. So you can see that it's about a third less expensive with just nominally priced energy. If you have solar, you know that you can get solar from anywhere from 6 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour if you have a solar system on your house.
Yeah, and
So
gas is about $5 a gallon right now.
I'm using 350 just in
Yeah.
case we get people from other places.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Yep. And I thought gas was $2 a gallon. Didn't somebody say that gas was $2 a gallon? We don't have to go there. All right. And Nick has a great example from his
Yeah.
public charger. And Nick, did you replace
It's going to be animated, so just
Oh, it is.
click as I prompt you. Wait,
Okay.
not yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So this is in the category of mostly false, okay, for me. The public charging network is not there yet. It's about the same as when I started charging. There's a lot more chargers, but there's also people like this example. This is an EVgo charger in Corona that I tried to charge at last week. Not only did this Kenya, they all have cute names. I love that. But this one's called Kenya. This had no cables. Okay. Someone cut the cables, I guess. This is
Yeah.
behind a Chase bank. you know? So I had to switch to the Walmart next door, which was fine. But you are going to have situations like this where you show up at a charger, you check it on your app, it tells you chargers available, you get there, and either there's a wait or it's not in service. So this is a problem we absolutely need to fix. And the stories that get me excited are these full service charging stations that are starting to pop up. There's one in Santa Ana. There's some coming in LA where they have services and you can stop at a restaurant and you feel safe and the equipment is maintained. But in the
Yes.
meantime, we're in this sort of ramp up of early adopters, and there are some hiccups. So this trip, I went to India. Go ahead and click to the route, Robert.
Yep.
This was 130 miles each way. I visited a builder. So my 240-ish highway miles in my Bolt got me all the way there. And actually, I was showing a little over half charge. So I did my meeting. I thought I got a chance at making it home on fumes. But there's a climb out of the Coachella Valley, and your battery's going to go down quicker when you have a climb like that. So by the time I got to Riverside, I'm like, okay, I need to find a charger. I'm not going to make it all the way home. And that's how I pulled up my apps and I found a few options in Corona, no big deal. And I charged in Walmart. And let's just show you what it cost me. I found this is an Electrify America station. I'm a non-Tesla, so Robert's in much better shape with his Tesla charging network. He'll tell you about that. But we have Electrify America, we have EVgo, we have ChargePoint. Those are probably the three biggest networks. And so I just charged for, what was it, 17 minutes, something like that. And it went from 12% to 34%, and it cost me $10. I mean, it is so cheap, even at 64 cents a kilowatt hour from time to time with public stations. Most of the time I'm charging at, I don't know, 30 cents a kilowatt hour at my house. And then on these long trips, I do occasional charge ups. Now, San Diego, I can make it there and back on a charge without stopping. But when I go to the Bay Area, it's a two stops deal for me. I've got to stop usually in Santa Barbara and somewhere off the 5 around Paso, and then I can get there. So it's not quite there yet. And to Roxanne's question about expectations on battery improvements, the most exciting thing I've seen, Robert, is Toyota's work on solid state batteries, where they think they're going to be able to produce EVs with 500 to 700-mile range. And so I'm
Yeah.
sort of holding out on replacing my 2019 Bolt for that next generation. I don't know how far out it is, but I'm hoping to not buy another one till then.
Yeah, the solid state batteries are exciting. And there's so much research and development going into batteries. I think in our lifetime, we're going to see something the size of a cigarette pack that's going to be able to power our house, right? It's going to happen. That's just the focus of everything. There are billions and billions of dollars going into that research to do that thing. And solid state is the next generation. And I, like Nick, took my son was going to school in UC Santa Cruz, and we took the Chevy Bolt up there, and it was that experience of range anxiety, and there weren't enough chargers, and the charger's broken, and all that kind of stuff. And Michael, is it Michael, who chimed in? Joan? Yeah, Michael had the same response that I did. We went out and bought a Tesla, and it's gone. The problem is gone. Never had a problem. The technology is so far advanced versus all of the other charging networks. And I'm glad to hear Roxanne has a favorable review of Electrify America.
Me too.
And just the mindset. I can't believe the other manufacturers just didn't, because Tesla figured it out. All they had to do is do the same thing. It's the Burger King model. McDonald's spent about $1 million per franchisee to make sure that the location was correct. And Burger King just basically went across the street. And I think there's still that opportunity, right? These other companies can just go across the street, put a charger in from where Tesla is, and and maintain them. But we're still not there yet, and so the Tesla network solves that problem, and many manufacturers have signed up. In fact, at the end of this year, all manufacturers are going to the charger plug, which is a little bit smaller and a little bit more elegant to use, and are signing up so that their cars can charge at Tesla's super charging stations. And the charging station nominally costs about 34 cents a kilowatt hour as a Tesla owner. But I have been to others that are up to 70 cents a kilowatt hour, and that's, and so, but the bulk of the charging that we do is really at our house for somewhere between 6 and 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So great examples. So now we wanted to move on to talk about the charging levels, right? And my next door neighbor, Lou, beautiful guy, drives his car, I don't know, 4,000 miles a year, right? And he wanted to buy an electric car, and he got really stymied on the charging infrastructure. He said, "Oh, I don't know about putting that thing in my house," and no. And I just said to him, "Lou, you don't need a 240 volt charger. All you need is a trickle charger, and you can just plug it into your wall, because you drive so little that the car would be fully charged all the time, because he basically goes to the gym, and he goes to the pool, and he goes down to the beach, and that's about all he does. And he drives long distance so infrequently that he could use a supercharger, and it really wouldn't impact the profile of the cost of the charging significantly. So there are people out there, and I know a number of them, who have Teslas, and they still only use the standard household outlet to charge their cars, because they just don't drive that much. So I think it really depends on your driving profile, and so keep that in mind, because you could just save a lot of time and aggravation and money by just using the plug that comes with the car. Level 2 is a 240 volt, and you get about, compared to 12 to 16 amps with just a wall charger, you get 12 to 80 amps with a 32 amp charger. And that's kind of what we recommend. If you're going to go to 240, we don't recommend, a lot of people are putting 80 amp chargers in their house. And the problem is that the spike in your energy use is really not good for your bill. And so, especially if you have solar, you want to keep it to the point where you're using less energy than your solar is producing, and charge in the middle of the day. That's the cheapest thing you can do at this point, especially with NEM 3. The charge time for that is about 10 to 20 miles per hour. So it's 20 plus hours for some EV models that have huge batteries. The bulk of the cars will charge in about 8 or 9 hours fully, from 0 to 100%. But there are specialized vehicles, Hummers, and the biggest battery packs in, for example, the Ford F-150 Lightning, that have 130 kilowatt hour batteries. These are enormous monster batteries. But they still, over time will charge, just not as quickly because of the tank, if you will, is that much bigger. And then again, when you're on the road, you want to use DC fast charging, and you want to make sure your car can accept that many amps. So it's, as Nick was mentioning, the Chevy Bolt can only handle 50 kilowatts at a time, and you want to be able to use much more than that. 50 to 350 is the range, but 50 is, in my mind, not viable for a long distance vehicle. If you really want to do a road trip, you need something at least in the range of 150 to 250 to do a road trip that doesn't feel like you're waiting around for the car for a significant amount of time. The next thing are the charger heads. And again, all of these will be going away for the last one that you see there, which is the NACS, which is the Tesla plug. And you can see it's just smaller and a little bit more elegant than the others. CHAdeMO has basically gone away. It's only used on the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi Outlander, but it's basically, you still see them on chargers, but you don't see them as much on cars. J1772 are the ones that you see in, people's homes. And then the CCS type is basically the 1772 with 2 extra pins for the DC fast charging. And this is what I talked about earlier. If 15 amps will do the job, it's better than 30 or 40 amps. And we just gave you a couple of examples here. A 120 volt is the standard plug in your house with a 15 amp breaker. That'll give you 1.8 kilowatts. Again, that's that peak power. How much can get through there, that pipe, which gives you about 6 miles per hour. So if you got 10 hours, like if overnight, you're going to get 60 miles. Most people don't drive more than 50 miles in a day. And so that's, generally fine for a lot of people. If you need something faster, and we put 2 240 volt, 40 amp breakers in our house, and we never used the 2 at the same time. So it was really a waste to get 2 from our perspective. But you can see all the way up to 80 amps that has a peak of 19.2 kilowatts per hour, which gives you 76 miles per hour. And the thing about that, I want you to watch this as we go to the next slide. If you have only an 80 amp panel, right, that means you're using all of those watts to charge your car, which makes no sense at all, right? You need to run your refrigerator, you need to do other things. And so it really also depends on how big your panel is in terms of whether or not you can install a 240 volt charger. But there are tools and tricks that help get around that. And these are some of those. They are load management devices that allow you to share your dryer plug. For example, if you have an electric dryer, you can share the plug with your EV. And so when the dryer's running, the EV won't be charging, or you can prioritize one or the other, is essentially what can happen. And then all the way on the right-hand side, the Emporia does something really interesting, where it will only charge your electric vehicle to the point that you have extra solar generated by your solar system. So there are a number of technologies that are really prime in the market that help you do these things very, very efficiently, because that's the most efficient thing you can do, is use just as much energy as you're generating and not more, because once you break that threshold, the electricity becomes much, much more expensive. All right, now we're going to move on to choosing and living with your EV. Nick, are there any questions?
Comments?
Oh yeah,
no questions.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of experience. Tesla adapters, how they're dealing with driving from slow to Chico with an EV. It sounds like we've got a lot of early adopters with us today who are pretty comfortable with the technology.
Love
but
that.
Also, low income people being able to afford EVs.
Yeah.
Question Joan brought up.
Yeah, it's a big issue. It's a big issue. And we're going to get into some of the incentives around that as well, because we know that they are just so much less maintenance and so much less costly to operate than other vehicles. We want to make sure that they get in the hands of disadvantaged communities, which are oftentimes, unfortunately, the recipients of too much pollution in their neighborhoods as a result of power plants and other things already putting big loads into those disadvantaged communities. And so we want to clean them up as much as possible. And EVs are a big part of that. So we want to talk about evaluating your next car, your EV. What things should you be looking for if you're looking for an EV? And one is the cost versus the cost of ownership, because we know the upfront cost may be a little bit more than a regular vehicle, but we're convinced that the cost of ownership over the life of the vehicle is far, far less. And so we're going to talk about that specifically and give you examples. We're also going to, we also want you to watch the range, the battery capacity in kilowatt hours. That's the measurement. Oftentimes they'll say a car can go this far, but we really want you to know what the kilowatt hours of the battery are. I went to a Nissan presentation, and I asked one of the unfortunately, one of the people there didn't know how many kilowatt hours were in the battery of the car when I asked the question. And it seems like a basic thing, but they're so trained to talk about the number of miles it can go. But you want to know both, especially if you're interested in the bi-directional thing. And we'll talk about that specifically, why that's important. You also want to know the efficiency. The MPGE is important, as well as the miles per kilowatt hour. You want to know all of those things going into the equation. And we'll show you an example of that in a second. The speed of charge is critically as important as we mentioned before. The speed of home charging and the speed of DC charging on the road. You want to know both of those things. And also the charging network access. The vehicle that I buy, can I charge it at a Tesla charging station? So for example, some of the new some of the new Mercedes have a different architecture. It's an 800-volt architecture. And as I'm doing some reading on this, they actually can't charge at the Tesla stations at the higher rates of speed. So these are the kinds of things you want to make sure that the generation of vehicle that you have actually marries with the charging access. And there's going to be more and more standards for those things going forward, but there is a mismatch that I'm seeing in some of the comments as I'm doing the reading on these things. The next point is one of my favorite parts of electric vehicles. I don't know about you guys, but the regenerative braking is maybe my favorite part of the whole thing. It's they call it one pedal driving, where I actually don't have to move my foot over and hit the brake. Number one, as a mechanic who's changed so many brakes and have ingested so much asbestos and other brake dust that I never want to touch again. The fact that the brakes on my electric cars could last the life of the car is a really exciting thing for me. And it's so much nicer to have a car that just comes to a natural stop as opposed to having to apply the brakes. It's just a nicer driving experience, smoother driving experience. And so it's one of those things. And again, I've driven, not only have I owned 7 electric vehicles, but I just make it a hobby to go into showrooms and drive these electric vehicles. And I recently drove the new Nissan
Ariya?
Ariya, yeah. And as I'm driving it, the salesperson's in there, and I said, well, how do I switch the regenerative braking so that the car completely stops itself? And she said, oh, the car can't actually do that. We haven't programmed that in to do that. I said, well, is that going to be in the next? No, she said, no, we want it to feel like an automatic transmission. And I just couldn't even believe it. Like some of these manufacturers don't get it. Like, no, I want the car to completely stop. I don't want an automatic transmission was never actually something that I wanted. I had stick shift vehicles because it helped me slow down on a curvy road, right? I mean, you want the control and the performance that comes from that kind of feeling. And that's what regenerative braking gives you. And so the fact that they didn't get that is a kind of a strike against that vehicle. Unfortunately, I said to them, please go back to your development people and tell them people want the car to completely stop itself. And hopefully they're sending that message back on the car, because other than that, the car seemed fine.
Excuse me, Robert, time reminder, we're down to half an hour.
Yeah, thank you. Yep,
okay.
We still have a lot to go. Yeah. So battery cooling systems, the first Leafs, I don't know if you had any problem with yours, Nick, but they didn't have a proper cooling system for their batteries.
Right, air cooled.
And yeah, it was a problem. But most other manufacturers are including that without a problem. And the bidirectional capability that we're talking about. And then, you have to think about your lifestyle and what you're capable of doing. Can you charge at home? Are there public chargers otherwise available? Do you have one car versus 2 car? Can one car be a hybrid and the other one be fully electric? Those kinds of thoughts. We have 2 cars. We have a Tesla for the long range. We have a Tesla Model Y for long range, and we have the Chevy Bolt for in the neighborhood driving, and it works out beautifully as a result of that. And then is solar an option for you? We always want to advocate for solar. There's the pairing of solar and batteries is becoming more and more powerful as NEM 3 comes forward. How you get remunerated for the extra energy that you consume. And so we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. Here's a little example though, because our Bolt EV, actually Car Driver did a highway test where they got 180 mpg, whereas my Tesla only got 94 mpg. So you would say, well, I should take my Bolt on the freeway then and drive it long distances because it gets so much. But the thing is, it only charges at 50 kilowatts, and therefore I really don't want to do long distances with it. And so that's, I want you to understand some of these terms so that they make sense. And the cars, despite the fact that the Model Y is, so much bigger, the EPA estimated combined range is 121 and the Bolt is 120. So it's interesting how these things play out. The last thing Nick and I have observed is, despite the fact that the cars have a range, for example, my Tesla Model Y has a range that they say can go 330 miles. In actual driving, I get about 260 miles out of it. And so I just want everybody to be aware that if you're driving 80 miles an hour, you're not going to get 330 miles. Probably if you went about 40 miles an hour, you would get 300, but nobody can drive, 40 miles an hour for that kind of distance. So we just want to make people aware of that reality. Install a charger at home. So right now, a charger, the charger itself will cost about $500, and it costs about $500 for the installation. Additional cost if there's a panel upgrade that's necessary. If you're interested in the subject and want to learn more, Consumer Reports has a great article, which I've linked in there. You can learn more about that, and they actually rank and rate the chargers in there, which I think is helpful. EV maintenance, Nick and I have had the experience of just not having to do any maintenance on these cars. It's basically tires and windshield wipers in our experience.
And air filters. Yep.
And air filters, cabin air filters, not engine air filters, right? So it's a very funny thing in that way. But Consumer Reports estimates that the maintenance costs are 50% less for EVs than ICE cars. The thing that most people get stymied on is, am I going to wear out the battery if I charge it to 100%? And it's not definitive, but people, say your battery might last a little longer if you don't supercharge it all the time and you only charge it to 80%. There's a couple of, of those things that the data's still not in, because they have cars that have gone over 200,000 miles that don't have significant degradation on their batteries, where all they did was supercharge those batteries. So in the end, doesn't matter that much. What does matter are the tire rolling resistance. I had the experience of changing the tires out on one of my electric vehicles, and I lost about 1/3 of my range capacity, despite the fact that the tires were rated really well. But the rolling resistance is not something that's built into US standards currently, which is quite amazing to me. So do your research in Consumer Reports, because they give the rolling resistance information in there. And the European version of the ratings can be found at the EPRL site. So you can type the tire in. The exact compounds might not be the same, because European compounds could be slightly different, but it'll give you a ballpark and a comparison that is helpful. And this is more critical if you want to maintain the range on your vehicle. The last comment is you might wear out the tires a little faster on an electric vehicle. We want to be just straightforward about that, because you're not using the brakes. The friction becomes the road versus the tires. And so tires tend to wear out a little bit faster on all electric vehicles. And but the comparison of cost, tires versus brakes, is a favorable one in terms of it's still less expensive to do that. EV versus an internal combustion engine. How to plan for road trips. The very interesting thing, I thought the game was over when Hertz bought over 100,000 Teslas, and they paid full price for them. because they understood the thing that we just showed you in the last slide, that their maintenance costs would be significantly slashed. The problem is they didn't train people on how to use them. And so people didn't want to, jump into this car that they didn't know how to use. And so in this slide, there are a number of tips that they should have let people know, right? What the expected range is, the DC fast charging network, how to use that network, what kilowatt ratings are, compatibility, charging etiquette. There's a lot to sort of know about those things when you go to a public charger. People were going to the public charger and waiting for the car to charge to 100%. And so they were waiting there for a very long time because the charge, as most people on this call know, the charge rate significantly decreases from 80% all the way to 100%. And so when you go to one of those stations, you only want to maximum charge to 80% and then just be on your way. But people didn't know that. So, those things and, the plugs and all the things that we're talking about here need to be explained to people before that they would actually rent the cars. And so we wanted you to know about some of those things. The last thing I mentioned there is preconditioning the batteries before charging. Batteries charge the best and the fastest if they're about 100 degrees, believe it or not. They're like people. If it's really cold, they don't, want to take that energy that fast. They need to be sort of warmed up a bit. And so many cars have preconditioning for the batteries. Once you select the charger that you're going to, the preconditioning will start automatically. And as a result of that, the charge will happen faster. And again, the people who rented those cars didn't know anything about that. And so it was problematic. For all of you, to minimize the hassle, you can download apps that makes it much easier. And to find those chargers, you can go to the Better Route Planner, PlugShare, ChargeHub, ChargeWay. And we just wanted to give you links to all those things that made it easier. All right, we're in the home stretch. Cost of ownership. We want you to be able to find the incentives. So we put the link in here. This is very simple stuff. You can go through the calibrations and calculations yourself. If you attempt to buy an SUV over $80,000, you're not going to be able to get the incentive. Sedans are limited to $55,000. They have to have U.S. battery components, but all the vehicles are listed at this site that still have the qualification. Your household income must not be more than $300,000. The head of household $225,000, individuals $150,000. So, and all those things might not be applied if it's leased. If you're leasing, the leasing company takes that $7,500 and you can get a reduction on your lease price potentially. For used cars, people talk about disadvantaged communities, and this is the place to look at those things. The income threshold is lower for used EV buyers, $150,000 for joint filers, $112,000, head of household, $75,000. Vehicles must be purchased from a dealer, and I'm sorry to hear that, but that's kind of just what it is. And have a sale price of $25,000 or less, and must have a model year 2 years prior to the current calendar year. So it really limits those things. Tax credit is $4,000 for 30% of the sales price of the vehicle, which is lower. So just know that there are those constraints, but still that makes the vehicle really inexpensive and really within the range of people to buy. And so it's great that those things are still in effect. We talked about the cost advantage. I put some slides in here that show that, gas, a gas vehicle that gets 30 miles is the equivalent of an EV going 46 miles. And if how much does it cost to drive 15,000 miles per year? It's much more expensive in a gas car than it is in an all-electric car. And over the 5 years that you might own this car, your savings are $3,102. That doesn't include the maintenance costs and all of the other things that you'll have to pay. This is just purely fuel, folks. And this next graph takes into account some of those other elements that are listed here. And some of them are more expensive. So for example, vehicle registration is more expensive with an EV. And so we wanted to include this, this tool, and the link to it is at the very bottom. But this is the most comprehensive tool that we've seen. But even with all of those other things built into it, the EVs, the total cost of ownership is so much less expensive. And for fleet owners, they really, really understand this. And that's why you see more and more EVs that are driven by the UPS people and other people, because it just makes dollars and cents. And here's a fleet example for you as well. So now we get to the myth portion of this thing, the facts and the myths. And that's my little dad joke. The resistance is a electrical term, right, that we talked about before. A lot of people talk about range anxiety. The reality is that most people don't drive more than 50 miles. The average EV gets 270. EVs are just, people are saying EVs are just as polluting as ICE vehicles, but that's not true. They're 3 times more efficient, and the grid is almost 50% renewable at this point. And that means that you're getting cleaner and cleaner driving every single day. The grid can't handle it. The US added 1.2 million EVs that we talked about before to the grid in 2023, and electricity use decreased over that time. The batteries will be too expensive to replace. We know that the batteries are getting less and less expensive, and they've gone 250,000 miles without a battery replacement. Warranties are 8 years, 100,000 miles on these cars, and we've seen these companies swap them out. People say that there's child labor in mining regarding the batteries. Cobalt from Nigeria is no longer in most battery chemistries. That's where we're hearing that from. And compared to oil companies, local populations and environmental devastation from mining is minimal. And that specifically is shown graphically here, in that the fossil fuel production in 2019, if you look at it, that's 8 billion tons, 4 billion tons, and 3 billion tons for oil and natural gas. And this is what mining is in the lower part for the low carbon energy EVs. And even if full production in 2040, it's only 28 million tons compared to what the oil and fossil fuels industry is doing. It's a drop in the bucket. And then how are we doing on time? I'm going to show you a piece of this video. People say, what happens to the batteries? Do they get landfilled? The batteries are almost infinitely recyclable at 95 to 98%. And this guy,
what happens to the lithium batteries inside of electric vehicles? Are they thrown in landfills? Are they recycled? A lot of questions to be answered. Let's get started. Electric vehicle. There are a lot of materials
this is a
inside the module.
Video, and I just kind of tried to condense it down a bit.
We have the plastic interiors that hold all the modules steady. Is that no one is required to disassemble
they go into
the pack.
a blender.
Keeping the human operator safe is probably the most important part. After the batteries are ground up, they go from a charged state to a completely inert state. There is no electricity. Kind of loud, but you can see the flowing through here down to a screen
after the blender.
where the plastics get vibrated up to this chute here, where they're dropped down into the processing. But you're probably not here to see how the plastic is separated from the battery. We're here to see what happens to the lithium, the cobalt, and the other precious metals.
After the electric vehicle battery is dropped into the shredder, it gets ground up into small metal flakes, which sink to the bottom of the tank and get conveyed up and out of the liquid like you're seeing here. Coming out of the vibrator, we have aluminum, steel, and copper, and sometimes even some sweet metals that come off the circuit boards, like gold, platinum, and palladium, all collected in bags to be recycled later.
With how valuable and useful these internal materials are, no one should be throwing them in a landfill.
The way the cobalt and lithium are extracted from that proprietary liquid inside the shredder machine is with something called a filter press. The metal-rich liquid is pumped into the large blue press, and that proprietary liquid is hydraulically squeezed out, leaving behind something called black mass on each of the individual filters. The black mass is what's falling down the chute as each of the filters are shaken, and is what contains all of our coveted elements.
The black mass has been valuable enough to be called the new gold. It really is the most valuable part of this entire process, and what Li-Cycle is after. It's a vital ingredient in making new batteries. One of the coolest parts about this system is while they are using a ton of water inside, it is a closed-loop system and none of that water ever leaves. It's not used up in any of the reactions. There's also no air pollutants in a traditional sense, since nothing's being burned. After the batteries have been shredded, sorted, filtered, and pressed, we're left with these three commodities here. We have the middle bag, which is full of plastics that came from floating off the top of the liquid. Then over here, we have of the batteries that go through this system are collected in one of these three bags. Lithium batteries are extremely recyclable, and Li-Cycle's doing it right here in Arizona.
So you get, you know, hopefully you
What
get
happens?
the sense that just not true. And then they don't work in cold weather. Here's a great example that basically said, yeah, a bunch of stuff went bad with my Rivian, but my diesel pickup doesn't do anything. So it actually works much, much better. Car fires are far more prevalent actually in hybrid vehicles. We know, what happens with those. And then Nick is going to talk a little bit about the California code. And yeah.
Yeah, Danica, are you okay with us going over a little?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah? Okay. Every time we offer a new class, it's a little unpredictable how much time we're going to need, and we've had a lot of great discussion. All right. So I recently went to Indian Wells to see the tennis tournament. Great out there. And we drove our EV and we stayed at a Hampton Inn, new Hampton Inn, 6 new EV chargers there. And here's why. The California CALGreen code requires EV chargers to be installed in many new commercial projects. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through what the code requires, and you'll see why these are popping up in a lot of cases. Next slide, Robert. All right, first of all, if you build a new single-family home, duplex, or townhome with an attached garage, you're expected to make that EV capable. Can you click on the next? What that means is you have a dedicated raceway, you have reserved panel capacity for a 240 volt, 40 amp circuit. You don't have to install it at the time of construction, but you have to be capable of a future EV. There's also requirements that your panel be minimum 225 amp bus bar rating, in part to make room for this future EV. Next. All right. When it comes to multifamily buildings and hotels and motels like that Hampton Inn I just stayed in, if you build a new one, 40% of the parking spots are required to be EV ready. And that's level 2, not necessarily DC fast charger, but the 240 volt, 30, 40 amp, type range. And that means the receptacle is already there, the conduit's already run, so that installing that future EV charger is much more cheaply done. Everything is there that you're going to need. Now, 10% of the parking spots, and this is of those 40%, 10% of them have to be installed. Level 2 EV chargers are better. So that's why your Hampton Inns that are being built new are going to come with EV chargers. All right. Go ahead next. Now, if you're adding to or altering an existing multifamily building, 10% of the parking spaces being added need to be EV capable. Next. So you see mostly this is requirements for new construction. Now, non-residential buildings don't get a free pass either. There's a certain number of spots that need to be EV capable. That's the blue line, parking spaces along the x-axis, and a certain number of EV charging stations actually installed that need to be installed. And it goes up as the size of the parking lot goes up, similar to the hotel motel. And there's 2 methods for compliance, the space allocation method shown here, and next slide, the total power method, power allocation method uses total kilovolt amps installed, and you see that steps up. And you get different amount of credit for a DC fast charger versus a level 2 charger. Next. Same, there's requirements for additions and alterations in non-residential buildings as well. Let's keep moving here. want to get to bidirectional charging. There's even new requirements for heavy vehicles for certain building types, grocery stores, warehouses, and stuff. And there are some exceptions where you might find your local jurisdiction allows you out of these EV charging requirements in certain cases. All right, next. Notice ADUs don't require it. Keep going. I think there's a few more slides I have here. Yeah.
Yep.
First, understand that there's no specific requirements for an EV van space. Maybe you've seen them at the mall. It's a wider parking spot by a charger with an accessible pathway next to it. But if you are installing EV chargers, there is a requirement through the accessibility laws that those EV chargers be available to all. So in effect, your first EV charging spot needs to be an EV van space. And that's why you're seeing them everywhere. Robert and I hear from our multifamily developers, that is an obstacle for them to reserve that large van space. Next slide. But it's making sure that those, so you see the van accessible space required as soon as you build your first parking EV charger. And then more and more of the standard accessible are required as you have larger parking lots. And we've got a little diagram showing that what happens in various parking lot sizes. All right, I think that's the end of that section, Robert.
That's great, Nick. Well done.
Okay.
Well done. All right, last section. You guys ready? Bidirectional EV charging is exciting. What's coming forward is massive in that the batteries are the most expensive part of the renewables supply chain. And how do we make them less expensive? NEM 3 and TOU demands that we utilize as much of the solar as we produce on site. And how can I more easily use the massive traction batteries? There's two kinds of batteries. There are traction batteries, which are the batteries that drive the wheels. And then there's the low voltage 12 volt battery that's in the car, 12 or 16 volts, depending on your car. We're talking about the big traction batteries. How do we tap into that? And to make the grid better and smarter and more resilient and distributed, these are really capable pieces of technology. So currently, unidirectional is what we have, right? The grid energy goes into your house. You charge your car from that grid energy. And DC bidirectional charging is different in that you need an inverter on both sides of the thing to transmit the DC power from your car into AC power that the grid or your house can use. And depending on what time of day and how much energy and where the load is, that's the possibility and capability behind these things. Right now, there's different kinds of vehicle to something options, and I want to go through those really quickly so you understand. Your car might currently be capable of some of these things, and you can use them in emergency situations. So vehicle to X is the sort of umbrella term that encompasses all the bidirectional charging options. Vehicle to L is the vehicle to load and allows your EV to power camping equipment, power tools, home appliances, and other devices on board or with an adapter. So the F-150 Lightning that you see has onboard plugs on them, and we'll talk about that later. The Ioniq has the Hyundai Ioniq has a plug like you see in the bottom there that basically allows you to plug a 15 amp circuit into and power your refrigerator and some lighting and your Wi-Fi, for example. If in fact the power in your house goes down, you just throw an electric cord into your house and you can power these things. Or if you want to go camping, and use electric camping equipment, that's a capability of the power pack as well.
Our Kia Niro has that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Have you used it, Nick?
Yeah, works
What
great.
did you do with it? Yeah, I'm just curious.
Just tested it for now, but it'll be there in case I need it for the refrigerator or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And did it come with the adapter, or did you have to buy the adapter?
It came with it.
Beautiful. Love that. I love that. So that's the vehicle to load. And the F-150 Lightning and the Cybertruck have 120 volt and 240 volt. So you can weld off of the back of these things. This is really advanced technology. So if you're a farmer somewhere, you can take these trucks and really do, you know, some amazing work. And they talk about what 7.2 kilowatts. Again, that's peak power, what that can do. And 7.2 kilowatts married with 131 kilowatt hour battery in the F-150 Lightning is an incredible thing that you can build a house or do a mobile metal shop or go out, you know, and ride EV motorcycles all day long with that kind of power. It's really quite amazing. The vehicle to home is, or the vehicle to building allows the EV battery pack to be used behind the meter for backup power and the ability to mitigate peak electricity on NEM3 rates. So, and be careful, not all of these things work together seamlessly. They're not there yet. The standards haven't all been set up. So for example, if you buy this kit for the new Chevys, it only works if the power goes out. So it doesn't allow you to do arbitrage and keep your 4 to 9 bill in your home down. And so I'll talk about that, but that's really what you want the batteries to do. You have to buy a home battery to hook all those things together so that it's not seamless yet. So I want to be clear about that. We're not really there yet, but we're almost there. And vehicle to grid is sending electricity back to the utility network, just like buildings with solar and power can do. And there are very specific times in the late afternoon in September and in October where they will pay you up to almost $3 a kilowatt hour for the energy that you can send back. These are very, very specific windows, and you want to be able to tap into those things. And that's why people are getting batteries and then sending the electricity back during these very specific windows. Vehicle to vehicle is something my neighbor does, and I'll talk about him in a second in the case study, that you can you can charge up another vehicle from the back of the, you know, F-150 Lightning, for example. That's imminently possible. My neighbor does it right there. So background and use cases. This all started after the Fukushima earthquake, where Nissan and Mitsubishi used their EVs as portable battery packs in an emergency. They built inverters and tasked the vehicles as portable rescue and recovery stations, essentially. And they worked really well for that purpose. And they realized this is a booming market. Friends of mine are in the school bus business, electric school bus business, are their transition to all electric to reduce the pollution for the kids, number one, but to also provide a revenue stream for the schools, because these batteries are enormous in these vehicles. They charge up all day and they don't use that much energy making their rounds. So they have the capability to send that energy back at the end of the day when the grid needs it, and they're making money on it as a result. The background and use cases, the last one is my neighbor who's right down the street, who's really a great guy, my friend Brad, and he bought this Ford F-150 Lightning. And when I saw it, I was like, holy cow. And he came out of his house and he sort of gave me the tour. It's got an incredible frunk in the front, very large, but it's got plugs everywhere, plugs in the front and plugs in the back. And again, it's got a 240 volt charging plug in the back, which you see in the third thing. And he uses a solar edge inverter and a solar edge charger that never allows the truck to break what the solar is producing. So he always stays under that envelope, and that saves him a ton of money. He also charges his other electric vehicle off of the Ford F-150 with just the standard plug that came with the vehicle. And then he said, I haven't figured the way to get all the energy back into the house. As we discussed, some of that technology is still nascent, and there's actually a class action suit against Ford because Ford promised to make all this stuff work, and it's not yet working, right? We're still at that bleeding edge state. So he bought a bunch of these, what are they called? EcoFlow batteries, and he basically just has them around the house and fully charges them off of the solar. And because it stays underneath that envelope, he's always using the most efficient solar. And then he plugs his dryer and he plugs other things into them around the house so that he's not using grid energy. So his grid profile is really minimal as a result of that. So this is the last example. This is my Chevy Bolt, and I bought a 3,000 watt inverter, or maybe it's a 4,000 watt inverter, in case of an emergency, I can plug this into my battery very, very easily and then plug it into my house. And so Nick and I were doing an Earth Day demonstration. So I brought it and I put some lights on it, and I put my, a monitor on it and all kinds of things on it. And it works beautifully. And it's very easily with 2 wing nuts, I can attach it to my Chevy Bolt, and in an emergency, just pull it out just like that. Why is this so compelling? It's because of the cost of batteries in a car are so much less than they are in home battery installations. A Tesla Powerwall is $12,000 for 13.5 kilowatt hours of power. The Chevy Bolt that I have was $24,000 for 60 kilowatt hours of battery capacity. It's like half the price of what a Tesla Powerwall is. That's why this proposal is so compelling, and you can see the rest of the comparisons there. There's other benefits that I'm not going to go into all because we're right over time. And the technical concerns are still there, but we're watching this space very, very carefully because we believe that these things will be solved. And it's a huge advantage for individuals and the grid to enable and use the capacity of these very large batteries to do something that otherwise would be unable to be done at the same cost. More and more EVs are being sold in the US with offering bi-directional charging. So here's a small list of them, but more and more are being added every day. Here's companies who made the commitment to do this thing coming forward. And ways to access it, as we talked about, these adapters can be bought for $99. Nick, yours came with it,
Right.
but other cars are right there ready for it. So our recommendations are to make sure you ask for these things. It's consumer demand that gets these things done. So ask when you're at this car dealership or talking to somebody about buying a vehicle, ask for this capability. Because then they can translate that back to the manufacturer and say, hey, this is what we need to do. Our recommendation at this point is if you need to do something like this, if you need backup power, put the smallest battery that you can into the house. For example, a 5 kilowatt hour battery, which will allow you to unlock the capability of the EV in many of these scenarios. For example, General Motors does that. They say if you buy a small battery, then we can enable the capabilities of the bigger battery. Really, we need advocates to tell the manufacturer, we really need this technology coming forward. This is a critical piece of the puzzle. All right, we're at the summary, and we appreciate your patience. We're 5 minutes over, but the long and short of it is EVs are the most fun kind of vehicles to drive. They're quick with a low center of gravity. They're better for your health and better for your wallet. Like all technologies, the cost is coming down and the capabilities are continuously going up. There's little or no maintenance to these vehicles. The total cost of ownership is at least 40% less. At home, charging with solar is the very best value, but still outpaces ICE vehicles in many use cases, even if you don't have solar. Know the facts versus the myth, and we went through a number of them today, and hopefully we did some myth busting for you. Know the requirements for EV charging and start preparing for bi-directional charging because it's coming. Here's some additional resources. I highly recommend you watch Tony Seba's Rethinking the Future. He did a talk on this and why EVs are inevitable, essentially. And then Plug in America has an incredible website with tons of resources, and I put as many other resources in there as I could squeeze. And then Nick's website is Net Zero Nest, and my website is Green Idea House for our house projects. And with that, please take down our email addresses, and if we can ever do anything for you, we're here to be a resource. And thank you, Danica, for allowing us this opportunity today. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for staying with us during this presentation. We look forward to doing more of these with you. All right, Danica, you take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert, for a very informative course, and Nick for monitoring the chat as well. And thank you, everyone who came today. And as always, if you have any Energy Code or CALGreen questions, we offer a free code coach service to get your questions answered. Whether you're a homeowner looking to make changes to your home that affects the energy code, or an energy consultant, engineer, contractor, or architect working on a project, we are here to help you out. Next slide, please.
Oop, sorry.
Here we go. And if you have any questions in receiving your continuing education units, please reach out to my email. We will be sending out a survey in the next couple of days along with the recording and slides, and we encourage you to fill the survey out to give us a better direction on what everyone is interested in terms of the courses that we offer. And we have been doing a 5-part Energy Code implementation series with 2025 code updates, and we have 3 courses remaining in the series focusing on single-family additions and alterations, actually next week, and ADUs and multifamily. And if you just can't get enough of Nick Brown, we have 2 upcoming courses with Nick, an in-person event all about all electric ADUs on May 16th. That's next Friday, and a heat pump water heater online webinar on June 27th.
Can't miss those.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Looking
So
forward
you
to
can
that.
sign up
Unfortunately, I
for
won't be
the
able to bring my EV because I'm bringing a heat pump water heater up for everyone to put their hands on, and I need a U-Haul.
pretty cool. Yeah, everyone can sign up for these trainings and see more offered on our website at 3c-run.org. And with that, I'm passing it back to Nick and Robert for any remaining questions.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions in the
Thank you,
chat, but if
Chloe, for sending over that registration link for Nick's all-electric ADUs
super.
course.
Roxanne had a question for those who have a little time to hang out about how much, when it comes to bidirectional charging, how much of your EV battery your house is likely to eat up. And I thought that was an interesting one. On average, at 1 kilowatt hour an hour is a typical like usage profile for a home. Obviously, a lot of variation there. But on a peak basis, let's say this is July 31st and it's really hot and you're trying to keep your air conditioning running in addition to your fridge and the basics, that could be 5 kilowatt hours per hour. But still, if you've got a 60 kilowatt hour battery, you can see that being able to power your critical loads for multiple days, especially if you've got a solar system that's able to periodically replenish that. But if you're expecting your, 60 kilowatt hour battery to power your whole house, well, that's not going to last multiple days. Robert?
Yeah, and that's what we're advocating for, the connection with solar, because if you could renew the energy in that battery with your solar over time, right, you end up with a loop, and that's what we're really advocating for, so that those batteries are big storage devices, but they store all the solar energy that's coming off the roof, so that even if the power is out for multiple days, you still have a way of accessing power. And obviously, if there is a giant emergency, what happens is the power goes out, and they would put you on what is called a critical loads panel. And so your HVAC, potentially would not be on that critical loads panel. And so the really big stuff would be on, but the critical stuff would be on there. Your refrigerator, your lights, your Wi-Fi, other things.
Your heat pump water heater. Yeah.
Your heat pump water heater could be on there because it's such a low profile,
right?
Without the resistance heaters in them. So it's just the critical stuff that gets put on there, and as a result of that, you could last indefinitely, potentially, depending on the size of your solar and the size of your battery. But the addition of something like 130 kilowatt hour battery to that profile means that you have a lot more capacity and capability. And the worst case scenario, we've discussed this with my neighbor. My neighbor said, and in the worst case scenario, all I have to do is find a charging station that is actually open and go and charge it for 45 minutes and then drive it back to the house and plug it back in.
Yeah.
So, it has an incredible capability as a mobile power station. at that level. And he's in the he actually has a contracting business. He's a pool maintenance person, and so it has utility for him as well, and he can write it off on his taxes. And just the nexus for him personally just made a ton of sense. So yeah, great question. And then somebody asked about mowers, riding mowers. And they were concerned about getting service for the electric riding mower. There are online accounts hauling the mower an hour away for repairs. And I'm sorry to hear that because my wife's family is from Minnesota. And so they do have riding motors, and they've been replacing them with electric versions of that. And they said they're seamless. They haven't had a problem at all with them. So I'm sorry to hear somebody had a problem. But again, there's less things to go wrong with them. And the fact that you ride a mower that doesn't have a catalytic converter on it means that you're inhaling a lot of really dangerous stuff as you're driving that mower around. So again, we're number one, we're concerned with people's health. Again, it causes heart disease, lung disease, and cancer. We know that the burning of those fossil fuels does that. So we still strongly advocate for all electric stuff, but I'm sorry to hear that it was breaking down. That's unusual in my relatives' experience with their tractor stuff. So they are in the process of replacing it all, and it's happening in Minnesota. And the rates in Minnesota are actually favorable because they have so much wind energy in Minnesota. So there's a bit of a nexus there as well. What else, Nick?
I put in something there on my leaf blower
Nice.
tirade. One of my
Yeah.
least favorite things in the world is those 2-stroke leaf blowers. So my electric one's working great.
I have one too. They're so good, so
Yeah.
quiet, so nice. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're 15 minutes after. I think it's probably a good time to wrap up.
That's super. Thanks,
Yep.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, you, Danica. You're awesome to work with. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
All
Bye.
right, thanks, Nick.
Bye. Thanks, Robert.